The point is, if you look for it, you can always make your audience a hero.
Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I'm on a mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to learn how to do that from my conversations with the visionaries, the leaders, the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, you're going to walk away with an actionable idea that you can take and use right now, and it will help you to build a better business today. This is Turning the Page. Welcome to another episode of Turning the Page. And this is a very special episode. This is actually my 1-year anniversary. So I'm very excited to celebrate this 1-year anniversary with a really, really great guest. And I ask always entrepreneurs the same sort of question, like, how do you generate more trust faster? Have you ever asked yourself that? How do I get more trust from potential clients? How do I become the go-to expert for potential clients in my particular marketplace? And digital marketing, again, to a lot of our audience, it's still, a big mystery. How do I do it? If any of these things have ever crossed your mind, then this should be a good episode for you, because we have a great guest today. We have Marcus Sheridan, and I met Marcus back. He did one of our conferences for IPC. He may or may not even remember it, but it was a great session. And I remember when it got booked. And by the way, his nickname is the Pool Guy, and that will become clear on why he's the Pool Guy later. But I remember my conference coordinator saying, "Oh, we got the Pool Guy." And I was like, "We have a guy that from the pool? What does that mean?" Once I saw Marcus speak, I can tell you I was a big fan. We made everyone in the company read the book. And in fact, we still utilize that terminology inside the company to this day. And that was before the pandemic that Marcus spoke. So that's how much of an impact that he had. So who is he? Right? Who is Marcus Sheridan? He's a big keynote speaker. That's of course we got him. In fact, Forbes named him one of the 20 speakers you don't want to miss. They call him the web marketing guru. He's the owner of Impact. So Marcus has, established one of the most successful digital sales and marketing agencies in the country. And his story is great. So we're going to get to that, right? He does 70 global keynotes talks every year. But what he's really known for, at least what I know him for, is his great book is They Ask You Answer, which is almost like the Bible, I think, of digital marketing. Once again, I'm a big fan. He's been rated. I've seen him speak. I've watched his YouTube. So welcome, Marcus. I'm so happy to have you.
Hey, Chris, thanks. Great intro. And I got a feeling we're going to have a great conversation today.
I think so. So let's start with, because your story is fascinating. I loved it. I was enthralled with it. Why don't you tell everyone, what is your story? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I started with a couple buddies, a swimming pool company in 2001, and we were fighting to grow the business. I mean, literally, we started out of the back of a pickup truck. And we pushed it along, and we slowly grew. And then 2008 came, and market crashed, and a lot of swimming pool companies went out of business in 2008, 2009, and it looked like we were going to as well. And thought I was going to lose my home. My two business partners were going to lose their homes, and I thought we were going to have to lay off our 16 employees at the time. So we had to figure out how to save the business. And that's when, I always say that's the beauty of pain, Chris, is because it forces us to do that which we otherwise wouldn't have done, right? And so it was during this time that I started to really just lean into the internet. And I had noticed how I had been changing in terms of the way I was consuming content online and what I was interested in and what was causing me to trust a company. And so started to read all these fancy phrases like inbound marketing, content marketing, social media, all that stuff. And so what I heard in my simple pool guy mind was, Marcus, if you just obsess over your customers' questions, worries, fears, issues, concerns, and you're willing to address those on your website through text, through video, you might save your business. So I said, well, shoot, if there's one thing I can do well is obsess about the questions that my buyers are asking me, address those as well as I can on my website. And we decided to call it They Ask You Answer. That was the strategy. I like to name things. And make a long story short, we became the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world. And the business just took off, and that led to a career of speaking, an agency, and a book called They Ask You Answer, which has done very, very well. And it's now been produced in multiple languages. And I have the best job, right, Chris, because I get to help companies become the most trusted voice in their space, which is pretty cool.
See, I love this concept. And as I said, when from somebody telling you that the pool guy is going to speak at your conference to actually hearing your story and what you took from adversity, it's just an amazing story. And I love all your work on, it's what all of us want. What all entrepreneurs want is a trusted brand. And you talk specifically about how your organization can become the trusted voice in a noisy, busy world.
Yeah.
So how did you produce this concept, and why is it so critical for businesses and entrepreneurs to embrace this kind of thing?
Well, if you think about what binds us together as businesses, because everybody wants to think how different they are, which to me is actually not very fruitful. I go to events, I'm sure you've experienced this, Chris, and oftentimes, you hear a speaker and you're like, yeah, but my situation is different. This doesn't apply to me, which is that's a hapless life to think like that. Instead thinking, how could this apply? Is it possible that I do this thing? And the thing is that there's one emotion that binds every business together. It's why we're so similar. And it's the emotion that allows them to give you money in exchange for good or service.
Exactly.
And of course, that's emotion. That emotion is trust. And that's the battle we're in, regardless of business, B2B, B2C, big, small, local, national, solopreneur, large company. That's the battle we're in. It's battle for trust. And, if I say to somebody, is Facebook important to your business, or is LinkedIn? It might be answer yes today, but in 20 years, are they going to say yes? Because that's a platform. We don't know what's going to happen. Those platforms are probably going to come and go.
Right.
So they're finite. What's not finite? Trust. When did it start? Well, we don't know when it started. It's always been. So thus it always will be, which means if you can build the model of your company, your brand around trust, you're going to be built to last. It doesn't matter what happens with AI. It doesn't matter what happens with the next platform. You're going to be okay. And so that's why this is such a big deal. And ultimately, people always say, well, what's the recipe for trust? And I'd say it comes down to really three things, Chris. Number one, you got to be willing to talk about that which others in your space are not willing to talk about. Number two, you got to be willing to show, especially through video, what others in your space are not willing to show. And number three, you got to be willing to sell in a way that others in your space aren't willing to sell. Those are the big three. And 99% of all companies, if you ask them, do you honestly and consistently talk about, show, and sell in a way that the majority of the peers, the competitors in your space do not? They're not going to be able to say yes. Can't do it. They're not. Oh, they could, but they're not.
But they're not. And it's a valuable lesson. And we hear this all the time, and try to be different and try to be different in the space. And yet then everyone sort of goes to this same thing. And I love the way that you put it, which is they ask, you answer. It's a pretty straightforward concept, but maybe you could elaborate on it, and especially as it relates to how you did it with the digital marketing that you did.
Yeah, it's rooted in self-awareness and customer awareness. And it's an obsession with the questions, the worries, the fears, the issues, the concerns that a potential buyer customer would have, and therefore the willingness to address those through text, through video, on your website, maybe on social as well, and integrate that into your sales process. That's what they ask you answer is in a nutshell. Right. Now, most companies, though, don't embrace it, even though they like to say, oh yeah, we're good teachers and we're honest, we're transparent. No, you're not, because you ignore most of the questions that people want to know in your space. And by the way, I know you've got a lot of financial advisors, Chris, that are listening to this, and they're already trying to, sit there and say that they've got regulations, compliance, and other issues. And that's not going to fly today. I'll tell you right now, that's not going to be an excuse for what we're talking about today, because if you want to become the trusted voice, you have to understand that you can address anything you want. You just can't always answer it exactly how you want.
Right.
And so if you're a financial advisor, let's say, you can't sit there and say necessarily, here's 5 stocks that you should buy in 2023. But can you talk about, what are some of the methods that you could identify the best stocks in 2023? Heck yeah, you can do that. And see, the ones that do well don't have a glass half empty. They got a glass half full mindset when it comes to subject matter and aggressively talking about what buyers, what customers, what prospects want to know.
Right. No, you know how powerful your message was after, and again, I read the book and everything. I judge every website that I go on from that day forward
That's funny.
on whether they're actually giving me the information that I'm looking for. And I will tell you, and quite honestly, because I think of the whole methodology that you brought everybody through during our session, I would go as high as 90% of websites I go on don't answer even the most fundamental question, which is how much?
How much is it?
Like, how much is it? Like, that is the most fundamental. That's the reason that a consumer goes to a website in the first place. And you can't find that no matter how hard you search. So maybe dwell on how successful you were by using that like honest, transparent approach.
Yeah. So what we found through research and data that's at this point utterly inarguable is that there's basically 5 subjects that consumers, buyers are obsessed with as they're researching organizations and deciding who to reach out to. 5 things that they want to know and want to understand before they pick up the phone, before they fill out that form on your website. And here's the 5 subjects. As buyers, consumers are obsessed with cost. How much is it? Rates, pricing, etc. Number 2, we're obsessed with what are the problems or the negatives or the issues with it. How could it go wrong? So that's problems. Number 3 is comparisons. We love to compare stuff online. We constantly compare. We want to know, how's this compared to that, this versus that. Number 4, reviews. We're obsessed with reviews, but when we say reviews, we want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the good. And then finally, number 5, best. We constantly research things like best, most, top. How many times have you gone online and researched best such and such, right? And so cost, problems, comparisons, reviews, best. Those are what we call the big 5. They run the economy. They certainly run the economy of search. And what's so fascinating about this, Chris, is buyers are obsessed with these questions. Businesses don't want to talk about them. So that creates a paradox of once businesses like the ostrich with its head in the sand thinking problem's going to go away. Problem doesn't go away. The question doesn't go away. The fear doesn't go away. And the thing about it is we say dumb things like, yeah, I think I'd rather just have them ask me. And if they ask me during the sales process, then we'll address it. But otherwise, we're not going to go there on our website. And you're literally losing at that point such a massive percentage of your audience because you wouldn't go down that road. And you mentioned cost and price. Let's talk about cost and price because there's so much psychology to this, Chris, right? So if anybody listening to this right now, I want you to reflect with me for a second and pretend that I'm talking to you if you're listening to this. So if I said to you, listener, have you researched how much something costs online, let's say in the last year, you'd say, yeah. And if I said to you, listener, okay, when you're on a website and you're looking for cost and price information and you cannot find it, what's the emotion you experience? You'd say, I get really frustrated, Marcus. And if I said, well, what makes you frustrated? You'd say, well, I'm the buyer, I'm the customer, I'm trying to give you my money, you're making it really hard. So if I said to you, well, in that moment, do you sit there and say, oh, I'm sure it's on this website somewhere, I'm just going to keep on researching, keep on looking on this site until I find it? The answer is, of course not. In fact, we've done the studies on that. We know the average person will spend less than 10 seconds on a website looking for cost and price until they leave. Furthermore, I'd say to you, well, in that moment of frustration, do you as the buyer, do you as the customer, do you say to yourself, well, they're a value-based business, I'm going to call them on the phone instead? That's ridiculous. You're not going to call them. You stopped that years ago because instead of calling them or digging further on that website, you as the buyer, you as the searcher, you're going to keep searching and you're going to search until what happens, until you find what you're looking for. And generally speaking, whoever gives you what you're looking for, they're going to get your business. If not your business, first contact, first phone call. And the real reason we get so upset in this moment, Chris, is because we know as the customer, as the buyer, that they know as the business the answer, or at least a semblance of the answer. And because we know they know the answer and they're not giving it to us, we now feel like they're hiding something from us. And the moment you feel like anybody is hiding anything from you online, trust is gone. And again, that is the business we are in. Now, if I could just keep going a little bit on this, Chris. 3 reasons why we don't like to talk about cost and price. 3 majors. Number 1, I don't want the competition to find out. That's ridiculous, because if I came to you and I said, do you have a pretty good sense of what your competitors charge? You'd say, absolutely, I certainly do. So if you know what they charge, it therefore means they know what you charge. This is the big secret, non-secret. Everybody acts like nobody knows what everybody's charging, when in reality, everybody's got a pretty good sense as to what everybody else is charging. Second reason why we don't like to talk about cost and price is we say every job is different. It's a customized solution, yada, yada. So if I came to you and I said, can you help me understand the factors that would drive the cost of your product or service up? Could you explain that? Answer, yes. If I said, can you help me understand the factors that would drive it down? Answer, yes. If I came to you and I said, you gave me a quote, a couple of your competitors gave me a quote, some of you are expensive, some of you are cheap. Can you help me understand why there's a delta in the industry? You'd say, absolutely. And if I asked you, have you ever answered those questions before? You'd say, all the time, Marcus. And the sad thing is generally we don't answer those questions until they've actually asked us those questions in the sales process, by which point we've lost a ton. So the whole it depends, every job is different, is the easiest one to address by explaining what drives it up, what drives it down, why some companies are expensive, why some companies are cheap. And finally, number 3 reason we don't talk about cost and price is because we say things like, well, we tend to be more expensive. And if we're more expensive, we just might scare them away. But the reality is what psychology shows us is what scares us away is not when you talk and educate and teach. It's rather when you ignore the stinking subject. That's what turns people off. That's what turns them off. And so ignorance is not bliss online. Those are the 3 reasons. And hopefully we just quickly debunked them from a psychological perspective. The reality is you can talk about cost and price. You don't have to give exact numbers, but you have to teach them. You have to explain these factors. You have to teach them value in the marketplace for that product or service that you sell, because if you don't, who will? Your competitors, and that's who they're going to learn value from. And I don't know about you, but that makes me sick. I don't want anybody learning about value from my competitors when they could learn from me.
Yep. It's such a simple message. Yeah. And when you say it again, it makes so much sense. And as I said, since I saw you talk and since I've read your book, it literally is how I think about, and I think your 10 seconds is like mine's almost a nanosecond. If I can't find out the price within a nanosecond of me searching for something, I'm out. And the basis of trust is so important. And maybe we can dwell a little bit more on this, especially in, my business being the financial advice business, is that really at the end of the day is the primary commodity that you're selling, right? People have to trust you before they're going to entrust their money for the guidance, for investment, for any of the advice that you're going to give. So maybe elaborate a little bit on the trust, but also maybe give some cool examples you've seen of where this has really worked well.
Every piece of content they consume from you, that trust meter is going up. And there's this gap, there's this, we call it the trust gap of where they are, which is a distance from you, and to the point where they actually reach out to you, talk to you, and do business with you. So there's a gap in between. So every time they consume a piece of content, every time they watch another video, every time you make it easy on them and you reduce friction, that gap gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where you're aligned, right? That's what we call alignment. There's different ways that this manifests, and a lot of it can be done in that vetting process. Let me give you an example, and this might offend people if I say this because we got financial people on the line right now, but this is something I'm going through right now. So I've been looking at financial companies, and one of the ones that I've been looking at is Vanguard, right? And so everybody's heard of Vanguard. The smart thing that Vanguard does on their website, they ask you a lot of questions about risk and your risk toleration. And you really get to rate yourself in terms of risk toleration. It's a simple tool they have, probably cost $10,000 for some developer to build. And it allows you to do that before you set up a call to talk to somebody.
Right.
That's powerful because it allows me to say, listen, here's my level of risk and adversity to risk. And I know that this person has a sense for my investing style before we talk. And that's comforting to me. One of the most interesting things that happened to me after COVID, I thought was really funny, Chris, and it's a true story. I had a president of a large financial advisor firm reach out. And he said, Marcus, my team has finally realized that you don't have to close deals on the golf course. And it's so true. Now, are there some stereotypes to that? Yeah, but we have stereotypes oftentimes because oftentimes they're true. And, within the financial space, a lot of deals do happen on the golf course or a similar type of environment, right? And so does it have to happen there? Can you get that trust beforehand? It's like you've met people, Chris, that listen to your podcast and for the first time, and they'll say to you things like, I feel like I already know you.
Right.
Why does that happen?
I have heard that.
You have heard that. I know there's no question that you've heard. I know you've heard it. because you've done a good job. You have fans that have gotten they feel like at this point they know you. You didn't know them, but they knew you, and that's what we say. If I'm an advisor, or if I'm a coach, or if I'm any type of business, my goal is that they feel like they have heard my voice, seen my face, and know me before we ever meet in person. That is my obsession, that they've heard me, that they've seen me, and they feel like therefore they know me before we ever shake hands. So the worst case scenario is you should hear, "Oh, you're a little bit taller than I thought."
Right.
That's the worst case scenario right there. But what you should be hearing is exactly what we just talked about is, I feel like I already know you. It's like I listened to all your stuff. I've been reading your stuff. I feel like everything I learned about such and such, I learned from you. Like, that's beautiful. That's powerful. That's the type of thing where now you're really cooking with gas.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the best definitions of brand, in fact, it's from another book. It's called "Brand, It Ain't the Logo." Brand is what people think of you.
Yeah.
And to your point, they think about you before they've even met you in your particular methodology. And they ask themselves, from all the things that I know, is this somebody that I want to do business with? And if you have all the evidence to point there, you've overcome every objection before they've even voiced it, you've answered their questions in a thoughtful, transparent manner. All of those things in combination build the trust that you're actually talking about. And this would apply, and as we round this up, does this apply just for new prospective clients, or does this also apply to existing clients? And then how would you reference existing clients, and how would you make this real for them as well?
Yeah, I think there's so much power to continuing to educate, assist, help your previous clients, right? Or previous customers. This is one of the reasons why I'm very intentional with my LinkedIn strategy. I'm aggressive on LinkedIn in terms of content. I put my best stuff there. It's a big focus area of mine. But the reason for that is LinkedIn is the best place I have found where previous business connections can continue to follow me and say things like, "I didn't realize you spoke on that as well, Marcus. Oh, I didn't know you had a keynote on that." Or "Hey, Marcus, I saw you mention such and such. Do you think you could come teach my team that thing as well?" Right. So we want to stay front of mind, right? And that's what gives us this ability to do. I think sometimes we think of a tool like LinkedIn. It's like, oh, it's a find tool. Sure, it could be a find tool, but for me, it's a retention, keep working with them tool.
Right. Right. Communication is so critical to continuing to build that trust, and communication with that level of transparency that you talk about. So this has been great, Marcus. So now I'm going to bring you into a part of my podcast, which I call rapid fire. So some rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you three questions. First thing that comes to your mind. What's your favorite thing in the world to do?
Fish.
I love it.
Offshore fishing. Offshore. In fact, I own an offshore fishing company.
Now?
Yeah, if you, it's called Speechless Sport Fishing. So if you ever want to do offshore fishing in the Outer Banks, you make sure you come and find my team. I've got a YouTube channel that's it's called Saltwater Fishing University.
Awesome.
And it's one of the fastest growing YouTube channels for fishing right now. And that's my great passion outside of family.
Right,
family, of course, is number one. That's a given, but fishing.
Fishing. I love how you answered that with zero hesitation whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What is your most memorable client interaction?
Can I tell a story?
Absolutely.
And I actually teach a lot about, I teach a lot of communication workshops. And so this will come out here. You might appreciate this, Chris, because I know you've spoken some and stuff. And so I was once speaking to a group of pharmacy store owners, and it was 500 of them in this keynote that I was giving. And I had just gotten done talking about cost and price on your website. And at the end of that segment, when I'm in front of the audience, I always say, so based on that, is it possible for you to talk a lot more about cost and price on your website? And everybody says yes. But in this particular case, one person stood up in the back, literally stood up with his fist raised and says, "But you don't understand." And everybody in the room just stopped. Like, you could hear a pin drop, because they're all just like, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with this guy?" Right. And so I looked at him. And of course, I know how to handle these situations, right? And I smiled and I said, "Sir, what's your name?" He says, "John." Now, everybody's still really nervous in the crowd. I said, "Okay, John, tell me, What don't I understand? He said, well, that's not what we do in this industry. That's not the way we've ever done it. And that's just not the way that it works. You don't understand. And so at this point, I know if I try to help John right now, it's going to derail the whole thing. Sometimes you can't resolve the concern in the moment. But if I'm the communicator that I'm supposed to be, if I'm, in this case, the professional speaker that I'm supposed to be, I got to make John the hero of the moment. I got to make him feel good somehow. And I've got to add to the moment somehow, even though he just threw a big negative cloud over 500 people who are really freaking out right now and worried that this guy's going to derail the meeting. Exactly. And so I said, okay, everybody, time out. What just happened is really, really good. You see, I love this type of interaction because a few minutes ago, I asked everybody in this room, would you want the business to talk about cost and price? And we all said, yes, of course we would. And then I said, but do you do it yourself as a business owner? And we all said, no, I don't really do it. And so that means we're all having this little civil war within us right now. Like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Some of us are just a little bit more passionate than others. In fact, look at John in the back. I mean, I just wish everyone in this room had the passion of John in the back. Folks, let's give John a huge round of applause. And everybody just breaks out in this huge applause. And John, he hears it, he watches it, he looks around, and he slowly just sits down.
He breaks the tension like that.
And it's done. So, afterwards, everybody said, how did you know what to say? Well, that's a whole other book. That's my next book. But the point is, if you look for it, you can always make your audience a hero.
I love that. And my last one, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, first and foremost, I want to be remembered as a good father, a good husband, someone that loved the Lord, and that was a great teacher, and that my teachings helped many, many people. If those things get written on the tombstone, I'm great.
Well, I can only tell you from my point of view. As I said, it was many years ago, and you may not even remember the occasion, but it is stuck with me all this time. And when I was talking to E, our producer, they've been getting you in the show, I was so happy that I knew that you were coming on one of the upcoming episodes, because for you to tell that message to all my audience means a lot to me, and I think you're a great teacher. So I do a little bit of a rant, and I ask all my audience that, how do you feel about being transparent with your future clients? Are you really answering their questions before they ask it? And what would those questions be? It's such a powerful, powerful concept, because trust is about being confident in who you're getting advice from, who you're going to invest for. And your value proposition should hang up to the amount of money that you're charging. And if it doesn't, that's a whole other problem that you need to address, because that's called economics. And that will be teaching you a lesson soon enough. So, Marcus, so great to have you on the show. Thank you much. Any final words for my audience?
I would just say, as you start to do this, if you want to do it, you can, as I mentioned earlier. But as a suggestion, don't try to sound smart when you do it. Someone once told me something I thought was really powerful, especially online. He said, it's dumb not to dumb it down. And I thought, isn't that interesting? But we all have recognized people, even subconsciously, we've recognized people trying to appear smart. But the moment you let that go, you don't try to appear or sound smart. Instead, you seek communion with your audience. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to make that connection. You're going to engender that trust. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. But Chris, it's great being here. And you're doing a great work.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those final words. And look forward to the upcoming episodes. Thank you again, Marcus. Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over a virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.